After sitting down for hours and hours, listening to people's psychological struggles, I learned something. Society has eschewed an archaic way of looking at mental illness, and that makes me angry. Imagine this. If I had panic attacks, and on top of feeling immense psychological distress, I had to carry the burden of worrying about being judged as broken and defective. Something about that feels very wrong to me. Here is why. The medical model in psychology claims that mental illness is like physical illness, where because of some pathology or injury, the affected person deviates from some standard natural normality. This premise paves a slippery slope to the flawed and stigmatizing conclusion that something's wrong with mentally ill people, that they are at fault, or weak, or abnormal, or inferior, or they somehow lack the moral fiber to fight an illness the way our antibodies fight a virus. Even though mental health stigma is being challenged in recent years, the remnants of shame live on in many. Fortunately, there's a movement in psychology that challenges this medical model of mental illness. Gabor Mate, a best-selling author and physician, famously reframed the question of why addiction to why the pain. His view is that addiction is not the problem. It's rather a solution to problems. He found that addicts are people who suffer from trauma, and so the addiction is actually the way of self-medicating to numb the profound emotional pain. This view of looking at mental illness, no, I don't like that term. Let's change that term now. This view of looking at mental health conditions as a solution is consistent with my experience working as a psychotherapist. I find that mental health conditions are responses, coping responses to trauma and other difficult life circumstances that create undesirable psychological consequences. Let's look at self-harm and suicidality. If you ask someone why they cut themselves, they will tell you the physical pain lessens the emotional pain. If you ask people why they want to end their own lives, they will tell you they want to end the excruciating emotional pain. They want to feel that they are at least in control of their own suffering and that there is a way out. In other words, there is utility and logic to these psychological responses. No one judges taking an ibuprofen for a headache as stupid or weak. So why do we do that to people with significant emotional pain? But how applicable is this alternative, non-pathologizing model? Does it apply to other mental health conditions? I think it's too late to run the slides. So I'll just put it on. Well, let me share some of my clinical experiences to illustrate the function of a mental health condition. One of my patients, let's call her depression in high school. With medication, she regained her everyday functioning. But her sad and empty feelings remained. As an adult, she actively looked for ways to change how she felt by climbing on the corporate ladder, upgrading her wardrobe, collecting awards, getting advanced degrees, pick up new hobbies. All promising avenues, but none made a real difference to how she deeply felt. In therapy, the function of her depression became apparent. She was the golden child in the family. And to maintain that status, she thought she had to hide parts of herself of which the family wouldn't approve, whereby denying and ignoring her authentic feelings and thoughts. This created a no-win situation, and no resolution was possible. She either abandoned herself or she risked being abandoned by her family. The agony and despair created by the situation was what her depression was recruited to mask, to numb her terrible feelings by feeling flat. My other patient, let's call her Charlene, presented her depression in a different way. Emma was a doer. Charlene was homebound. The luxury provided by her husband didn't save Charlene from being plagued by a chronic empty feeling the way Emma was. But different from Emma, Charlene was always tired, lacking the energy and motivation to do things. Crippled by her depression, she felt useless, hopeless, isolated, and lost. Even though Charlene didn't have a lot of friends, she had a brother who was very dear to her. When he started his own business, Charlene promised to help. But despite her conscious promise to help, Charlene repeatedly found herself procrastinating and forgetting to run errands for him. As you can imagine, this created a huge rift in their relationship and made Charlene feel even worse about herself. At first, neither Charlene nor I could understand the unconscious motivations and unconscious feelings behind her insistence on staying in bed and her resistance to helping her brother. But then, we started to talk about how she was given age-inappropriate responsibilities as a young child. Starting at 6, she had to run errands for her parents in the shady parts of her neighborhood. And that was terrifying for her. Remember, she was only 6. She also cut and burned herself from cooking dinner for her family, and her parents would scream at her for making a mess. So unconsciously for Charlene, doing nothing meant nothing bad would happen. It also saved her from feeling the rage from being exploited by her family back then, and the heartbreak that she wasn't protected like other children. Since no good choices were available, her psyche decided to lock her up in a bedridden depression. face painful feelings and risk her life again. These are not just Charlene's or Emma's stories. You'll find the theme, damn if I do, damn if I don't, familiar, because it's also in his story, her story, my story, and your story. No, we don't judge a fever, and we don't dismiss a fever. We judge and dismiss feelings all the time. Oh, don't cry. Stop being angry. There's no need to be sad, as if having feelings is a crime. To me, mental health conditions are messengers to us that something needs our attention. But stigma is showing and shooting these messengers left and right to our own detriment. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can choose. We can choose consciously and differently. Imagine what it would be like for you to have your own precious feelings respected and listened to. Let's start with that. Let's just stop there. With our own relationships with ourselves. Be curious and listen thoughtfully to our inner messengers and find out from them more about what it means to live a fruitful and more authentic life. Thank you.